The new Scrambler 650 is the second BSA product in India after the Gold Star that's been here for almost 2 years. And as you can imagine, this is a Scrambler version on the Gold Star platform. That means that the fundamentals are more or less the same in terms of the main chassis, that very unique engine, but there are styling changes and 1 or 2 functional changes that make a fairly significant difference to the way this rides. Let's start with the engine. This is that same 650cc single cylinder engine that draws its roots back all the way to the Rotax single from the early 2000s. It makes the same 45 horsepower, 45 Newton meters of torque here as it does in the Gold Star. And just like with the Gold Star, this engine is all about the torque, and even when you compare it to Royal Enfield's 650. This motor pulls in a really enjoyable way from as low as 3,500–4,000 RPM, and that's something that the 650 twin can't manage. That engine has a lovely, smooth, rumbly bottom end, but you need to rev it to get a move on. If you like an effortlessly torquey, big single-cylinder engine, this is one of a kind in India, and when companies like KTM and Triumph are downsizing their big singles, this remains the last true large thumper that you can get. The downsides to this engine, as you can imagine, are A, sound, and B, vibration. We'll show you what the sound is like. To be fair, it's not a bad sound at all. In fact, I quite enjoy the sort of thump, thump, thump that you get out of this engine when you're on the move. But it's not exciting in any way, and especially as a market that is growing up from singles and looks at twin and 3 and 4 cylinder engines as something aspirational, this does lose out in that regard. Another aspect with the sound is that the radiator fan is quite noisy at lower speeds, and that is something that you will hear as well. As for vibrations, it is a big single. There are going to be some, and you will really feel them at about 100, 110 plus on the highway. It's not a completely unstressed highway experience. If you want a smooth highway tourer, you may as well look at the twin cylinder Royal Enfield engine. But this is all stuff that we already know from the Gold Star, so now let's tell you what's different. The significant changes, as you can see, are that the wheel size up front is a little larger. The Gold Star had an 18-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear wheel. This has a 19-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear wheel. There's also a little more suspension travel. It's not extravagant by any means. It's less than 140 mm at both ends. I think this is about 138, and that's in the late 120s. But again, it's more suspension travel than the Gold Star. The offset of that is that the seat height has gone up. This is now an 820 mm seat height, whereas the Gold Star was just a little over 780 mm, and that's a substantial difference. For me, this is a fairly comfortable motorcycle. I do find that the foot pegs are a little higher up than I was expecting, and this is a fairly acute angle. It's not as relaxed at the hip as I would have liked it to have been, but it's reasonably comfortable, and the stance it puts you in with the shape of the handlebar is not bad at all. It's a nice commanding riding position, and like the Gold Star and also the Interceptor, this does feel like a long and large motorcycle. But to demonstrate what it's like for a rider of average height, we've got Ashley, who as always is 5'6", and he's going to show you what it's like. Yeah, so Ashley is basically not completely on tiptoes, but I think on the balls of the feet on both ends. And he also told me that this does feel like a large and heavy motorcycle. Thank you, Ashley. Another frame of reference is that Azaman, who's off camera right now, has told me that he finds this motorcycle a little less easy to manage than the Triumph Scrambler. For reference, he is 5'7". The Triumph Scrambler has a taller seat height than this on paper. It's about 830 odd mm, but the Scrambler is lighter and skinnier, and that's why it feels easier to manage than the BSA Scrambler. So how do those changes affect the way this rides? Well, the Scrambler does feel like a pretty solid, stable feeling motorcycle. I think the steering is a little heavier than I recall the Gold Star being. But the more significant change that you will notice is that the rear suspension is better behaved. The Gold Star was a really nice bike to ride for many reasons, but the rear suspension was very springy and it made the bike feel quite like a pogo stick, especially when you're pushing it through corners. This has been addressed here. It is a more firm setup. I still wouldn't say it's a particularly plush and very nice, comfortable setup. It works well at a reasonable speed, but when you ask quite a bit of it, you get the sense that it's not very well damped on the compression stroke, and it just feels like the bike is not happy to be rushed through bad roads or hammered off-road. Then again, you can still have a little bit of fun with it off-road, just don't take it too seriously. But I mean, the standing ergos are not bad. These panels do stick out a little bit, so it's not a completely natural off-road riding position, but you can have some fun. There's a reasonable amount of ground clearance. There's plenty of torque to spin up the rear tire if you want. And as long as you don't jump it too high or hammer it too hard, you'll have some fun on a trail. So if you're just riding down a road, you spot an interesting trail, go off, venture down, see where it goes, and you'll have a little bit of fun on this bike. Now in terms of rider assist, BSA is giving you a power mode, and when that light is glowing, you will notice sharper throttle response. It's not aggressively sharp, but it's also not completely chill, and if you just want to settle into a more calm ride, you can turn that off by long pressing one of these buttons. There's also traction control, but this is a fairly confusing thing. We tried turning it off and then keeping it on, and in both cases you can spin up the rear tire. Now, when the light is glowing, it does seem like there is some intervention, but not a lot, and you can really get the bike quite squirrely on a loose surface. And in the rain, I'm not sure how much support that traction control is really going to give you. The other weird thing about it is that it seems to be giving you some intervention when the light is actually glowing, and that's the other way around. When a TC light is glowing on most motorcycles, that means the system is off. On that topic, while the display seems to be exactly the same as the BSA Scrambler, that motorcycle gets a gear position indicator and this one does not. This is also a 5-speed gearbox. It's fairly long gearing, but on the highway you will find that this bike feels a little busy and buzzy, and that's a consequence of the fact that there is no 6-speed and the fact that it does produce vibrations. Alright then, let's talk about design, quality, attention to detail. In most ways, this is a nice and stylish looking motorcycle. These boards along the side do look nice. Large fuel tank gives it some presence. Slim tail with a central mounted brake light. It's a pretty neat looking exhaust. These things are nice, but there are a couple of things that I don't like. For one, this entire front setup just looks confusing and cluttered. You've got one fender, two fenders, and right next to it is a pretty small headlight. There's also no place that Classic Legends found to mount the front number plate for India, so it sits right here, literally touching the middle fender. The international models don't get this extension at the front, it's just a fender at the rear, and that would have been much more practical, but Classic Legends seems to have done that for India, and I'm not a fan of this look. I also think that while the overall build quality seems to be decent, it's not at the same level as the Royal Enfields, especially in terms of finish and feel-good factor, and that can be seen across the kind of bolts and fasteners they've used. And this, I mean, this plastic throttle body cover here just looks and feels cheap, and it's not up to the mark. Another small attention to detail thing we noticed is that the company has put these little protectors out here. One's on the brake lever and one is near the left side foot peg. The idea is to keep the rider's feet away from the engine, and on the right side it works reasonably well. But on the left side, the problem is that little loop of metal is exactly where your pant would be, and yesterday one of my colleagues found his jeans got hooked in there right at a traffic light when he wanted to put his leg down. He couldn't put his leg down and the bike went down. That's why we've got these two little scuffs out there. So it's a nice idea in theory, but it's not really well executed on the left side. And I also found that when I was riding off-road, I just bent the whole thing quite easily, because at some point I got my leg off the pegs, put my leg back on the peg and completely bent it. So that's something I would remove if this was my motorcycle. At the same time, BSA has priced this bike quite aggressively in India. The prices start about 3.25 lakh and they go up to about 3.4 lakh if I'm not wrong. And that is a significant amount lower than the Royal Enfield Bear 650, which is equivalent rival to this motorcycle. That's about 50,000 rupees more. So you do have a savings here. But I think as with the Gold Star 650, this bike is a real niche. You need to be looking for a big single cylinder bike. And I'm not sure how many people are out there in India at the moment who have that in mind, because like I said, we've all grown up on singles and we aspire to multi-cylinder motorcycles. So that is a challenge for the Gold Star 650 and the Scrambler 650. But as I said before, these are quirky, unusual bikes and they do have some appeal. So if this sort of character is what you're looking for in a motorcycle, give the Scrambler 650 a ride. You might just like it.